Hi, Corey, are you there?
Oh, hi, Seth.
Hi, Corey.
Good
So,
morning.
good morning. Yeah, we're doing this early.
Yeah. I'm so glad you could meet me here this morning because I have many things to discuss with you.
Okay, great. Let's do, I guess, intros. You go first.
Okay, Seth is, just kidding. um, Hi, I'm Choire Sicha,
Sika.
and it's spelled very poorly, and it looks like choir with an E on the end. And I don't really have a job. I'm the
That's not true.
co-proprietor. I don't really have a job. I'm the co-proprietor of a website called The All, which is pronounced The All.
And you're a freelance editorial writer as well.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah.
And my name is Seth Wallace. I'm a senior reporter on matters cultural for Newsweek, and I also write sometimes for Corey and his site, pronounced The All.
Which is very nice when he does. I have a question. I've never heard you actually say Seth Walls. I always thought you were a Seth Colter Walls.
It's more like a byline thing. I think it's a little preposterous to take up that much people's time with your name in spoken speech.
That's very polite of you. I admire that. Good.
Yeah, it's for Google disambiguation purposes. I think I recognized when I was 16 that there were lots of like high school pitchers, heating up the AA baseball circuit with my name. Mm-hmm. So I snuck the middle one in there.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
When you were Googling my name when I was 16?
Sports, yeah.
Right, okay. Well, let's stop wasting people's time, I guess.
Yes. I want to start by talking to you about your recent visit to Austin, Texas. I was wondering, I read your account of seeing the David Foster Wallace archives, and I wanted to know what was the most, I mean, not surprising, because I'm sure that kind of all of it was surprising, but I wanted to know what was the most, for you, what struck you the most?
I guess it was the single moment that was the greatest, sort of like quasi-religious epiphany was realizing that the long-rumored mashup text between John Barth's story, Lost in the Funhouse, and Wallace's response novella that's in his collection of stories called Girl with Curious Hair. There's a novella in there that in the author's preface to the story collection, Wallace wrote that his novella, Westward the Course of Empire Takes Its Way, is written, quote, in the margins of John Barth's Lost in the Funhouse, and people sort of debated whether or not there was some sort of actual metafictional mashup text that existed somewhere, or whether this was just sort of a metaphor that he was saying he was indebted to Barth.
Uh-huh.
And when I checked out, in the course of the David Foster Wallace Archive, which just opened at the University of Texas at Austin's Harry Ransom Center, it's comprised of a few different parts. There's all of Wallace's papers and drafts that survived him, and then there's also over 300 books that belong to him, about half of which are pretty heavily annotated. And so when I noticed that Wallace's own personal copy of Barth's Lost in the Funhouse was among the books that the Ransom Center was holding, I checked it out immediately, and it's sort of cracked, and it's this old mass market paperback, and it's falling apart, and it's in this special container. But I went to it immediately, and when I found that Wallace was essentially taking Barth's characters and writing his versions of their names for his own novella in the margins, it was, as I say in the piece that's in the print edition of Newsweek this week, it looked sort of like it was a vortex-like wormhole of 20th century American fiction, and it was kind of amazing and surprising and kind of like this quasi-religious experience for a particular type of literary nerd to be holding that text in his or her hands. Are
you now among, I hesitate to say our generation, but in the interest of being in my 30s still, which I am,
Sure. And I'm just now in my 30s, so.
Exactly, we're in the same generation. Are you? Generations come every 2 years now. It's a problem. Are you a member of the sort of devoted cult? Is the wrong word, but there's a very strong
lobbying force.
Attachment to David Foster Wallace among people in their 30s and even 20s.
Yeah, no, I think clearly, I think it comes through. I mean, I've written a piece about Wallace for you that we had earlier this year, and then I wrote this piece. I mean, I pitched this piece. The impetus was all mine to go down to Austin and rifle through the man's things. So yeah, I'm a devoted fan and slash whatever, I guess, analyst or critic or something short of scholar. I'm completely fascinated by his working method, his voice, and also this kind of moral consideration that he faced vis-a-vis the much discussed issues of irony in contemporary American culture, like how far you can push certain conceits in a humoristic way, but still have some sort of feeling left behind in the vaporous trails of what you're doing. I think is one of his big contributions, both to journalism and to fiction.
Right. As someone who kind of hates fiction, I actually do quite like him for his nonfiction, which is nice that I can actually take part in the great, I don't know, not canonization. That's a disgusting word for this, but he does carry. He has this major overhanging influence on the kids today, at best.
I mean, I think in our best moments, if I can call myself a kid for a minute, I think he does. I think in the worst moments, there's certain things about his style that have lost the argument to. Actually, I did something here. It's not in the magazine piece, nor is it in. There are a couple of online photo galleries that accompany the piece online in Newsweek that have representations of things that I copied while I was at his library. But there's one thing that I didn't get to include, which is his Pomona College syllabus for this class called Creative Nonfiction, where he defines what creative nonfiction is. Which I thought was pretty great.
Someone finally did, yeah.
The creative goal, broadly stated, may be to interest readers, or to instruct them, or to entertain them, to move or persuade, to edify, to redeem, to amuse, to get readers to look more closely at or think more deeply about something that's worth their attention, or some combinations of these. Creative also suggests that this kind of nonfiction tends to bear traces of its own artificing. The essay's author usually wants us to see and understand her as the text maker. This does not, however, mean that an essayist's main goal is to simply share or express herself, or whatever feel-good term you might have got taught in high school. In the grown-up world, creative nonfiction is not expressive writing, but rather communicative writing. And an axiom of communicative writing is that the reader does not automatically care about you, the writer, nor does she find you fascinating as a person, nor does she feel a deep, natural interest in the same things that interest you. And I think that, in both a lot of the online world that you and I both knock around in, there's a lot of really expressionistic writing that is predicated on caring quite a lot about the writer as a baseline assumption, which has to do with brands and following certain people, whether on Twitter or Tumblr. There's like this sort of assumed investment in somebody that runs counter to that.
Well, and also lack of explanation. I find most frequently that when people talk about creative nonfiction, it's a term I don't use and don't listen to or am always taken aback by, because what people seem to emphasize is the creative, and they mean that it's fictional. And I have huge issues with people working on things that are creative with the non-fiction part of it, and that's not his legacy. That's like sort of, to me, a hijacking of what he did,
right?
And it causes me no end of consternation.
As an editor or as a writer?
As a reader, as an editor, not as a writer, but
because you're working on a non-fiction book right now.
Yeah, but I can't. I'm working on a nonfiction book, or nonfiction in general, because I can't. I'm not capable of making things up. I don't have that gene, unfortunately, which is sad. I'm jealous of it, but more and more I find people writing fictionalized accounts of real things, and I'm maybe old and stodgy or whatever, but like I can't hang, and I don't know where that came from in our society.
So are you anti sort of belletristic creative memoir?
I'm not anti that. Belletristic. That reminds me of Harry Potter. I'm not anti that, but I'm anti, making stuff up. Which I think is what the kids feel comfortable doing today.
The kids. So you, do you have other questions about the Wallace thing, or do we need to move on?
I'm so over here. No, I'm kidding. I think it's fascinating, and I read all the stuff you did, and I'm also reading Tom Skoka's week-long essay this week, which is the week of Thanksgiving.
Are those up now, or is the first one up?
they're going up one a day all through the week of Thanksgiving. Well, he is not, ironically, but maybe Atlantically, as we say, in tribute to Alanis Morissette, on a cruise ship himself, sort of against his will.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, he brought the the nonfiction Foster Wallace book with him, of course. So in tribute, God bless.
No, that's good. There's one of the things that I didn't get to write about very much in the piece because it's only 4 pages in the magazine, which seems also like a lot of pages in the magazine these days.
Tina will change that. Tina will change all that. Don't worry.
Okay.
Is she behind you?
No, she's not. She could walk in at any minute, but Tina is not here. Is that actually a lot of the essays, which are already quite long in many cases, there are drafts of them which are considerably longer in the archive, which is going to be something that people are going to rush to look at and analyze.
I would be surprised if that was not all the unexpurgated or whatever would not be published someday. What do you think of the estate's thoughts on that?
Yes. Well, I had to actually work with the literary executor Bonnie Nadell for this piece because she very kindly gave us the rights to reproduce a lot of this material online for at no cost.
Which is amazing of the estate.
Yes. No, that was fun. The spelunking and finding chapters from Infinite Jest that were cut, and then also various other things from his books. I think people have enjoyed looking at that online from what I've seen. But yeah, there's going to be some sort of published edition of uncollected Wallace stuff in the nearish future. I don't know that it's nailed down. There's some juvenilia. There's some stories that exist that haven't been anthologized. There's a site called the Howling Fantods.
Sure.
That has collected a lot of the early stuff that has shown up in one place or another, either back in the day when Wallace was a student at Amherst or since then. Like I think Tin House published something last year that was, a very early Wallace story. All of that stuff is going to eventually, or some major portion of it's going to be collected in a volume. But the question is sort of how far back do you go? Because I did find one story in Austin which was completely not only unpublished, but there's no sort of record of it anywhere online except for the Ransom Center's finding aid.
Yikes!
And it's and they have it undated because they couldn't peg when it was written. But I think I have a pretty clear idea of when it was written. It must have been written when Wallace was an undergraduate because the title of it, and it's funny, is The Enema Bandit and the Cosmic Buzzer. And
yoinks!
What'd you say?
I said yoinks.
Yoink, which I recognized as a title that is used in Wallace's first novel, Broom of the System, among two characters who were discussing bad undergraduate fiction. So in Wallace's first novel, which he wrote, Broom of the System, as a thesis when he was an undergrad, he was already sort of commenting on his own juvenilia, inserting a title of a short story he himself had written that at some point he judged to be, an example of terrible undergraduate attempts at fiction. So, but
that's terrific.
And it doesn't necessarily need to be published. I read it and I copied it and I have it in my notes. And it's not. There are early Wallace things, including a story for the Allegheny Review from 1984, I think, called "The Piano and the Pantechnicon," which is a reference to a line in Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow. That is worth. It's short. It's 4 pages, and it is worth publishing. But the Enema Bandit and the Cosmic Buzzer maybe less so.
Still, there's 1,000 people with Tumblrs who are desperate to read that.
Right, that's also the case. But to reproduce stuff is, and it's kind of tricky because people have already taken images from us and put it online, but they don't have the estate's permission to do that. But we'll see how much of that just leaks out from the Ransom Center.
Look, that's the thing. It's sort of like, well, there's an argument there about. I respect the estate, and I respect the estate's forthcomingness. Many estates are not as thoughtful and as wise as they are. But this is the thing with when you put. No, totally. God bless the. They got this together really quickly, and did all this, but a lot of what, and I can see why. Not just an investment in copyright, but an investment in. In guiding the discussion, of his life and career, and we give that up when we put things online. Now is the truth. Right.
We had to make that clear. Actually, we had to do a whole legal back and forth with them, and we said because it's not going to be up forever. The stuff that we've put up. And
but it is.
So, but we'll take it down from our partner sites, etc. But we had to make clear that there are going to be third-party people archiving this that we have no control over.
Right. The Beast Week will take care of that.
the Beast Week will solve everything.
It will solve everything. I'm excited, frankly.
That's what I've been told. So, and I'm choosing to believe it.
You should choose to believe. Trusted leader.
We have a bunch of T-shirts with that logo actually being printed up.
Good boy.
So anyway, you didn't just bring up Tom Skoka. Did I say that right?
Yes. I used to call it. Yeah. Yes. That's
you didn't
right.
just bring him up because he has interesting excerpts from his own unpublished interview with Wallace from 10 years ago that he's using as vacation filler this week on his Slate blog. You brought him up because I think you and he have a co-byline on in the Times this morning.
Wasn't that ridiculous?
It's pretty funny. I like the Choire Sicha exclamation point making its way into the Times unofficial style guide.
You know, I have to say the copy desk at the Times, which is a sainted institution, and
Right.
I'm not slagging them off, like they're masters, and I revere people who work in the heart of newspapers, the editors that aren't stars, that don't run sections, the copy desk, the news assistants, that everyone, they're all awesome. But I will say the copy desk and general treatment of text has changed remarkably since I first wrote for them, only 7 years ago or whatever. So
How long did you work there, by the way?
What's that?
How long did you work there?
Well, I was only like a sort of freelancer contract person or whatever.
As was the style at the time.
As was the style of the world at the time, I believe your boss did coin the shortly useful term, the gig economy, which we then passed immediately out of thanks to the recession.
I never understood what that was, but
Well, it was a micro trend, Seth. So micro trends come and pass. But what was my point?
that the copy desk was amenable to your exclamation points.
They're either exhausted or they're relaxed, or there's a new breed there. Yeah, but they're fantastic. They're good. They're good people.
But style points aside, it's about you have tired, and Tom Skoka has also tired of this cult of the old Penn Station. Do you want to talk a little bit more about what gave you the idea for writing this piece and the timeliness of it, I guess?
Well, some of the it is the 100-year anniversary this week of the construction of Penn Station by the great and extremely profitable Pennsylvania Railroad, which was one of the great institutions of our time that then went and gobbled up other railroads such as the Long Island Railroad, and then not immediately, but fairly quickly crashed and burned under the weight of its infrastructure. And now we live in a, shall we say, government nanny state where all our transportation needs are taken care of at great cost to the state, or should we say the taxpayer, in heavily subsidized amounts. When you look at the annual reports for institutions such as New Jersey Transit and the like, it's for some of them it's something like the income from rail passengers pays exactly the staff, the personnel of the railway, and nothing else.
Right.
So, I'm a prime nostalgist, as I think you probably are too, as an opera lover, just in general.
A what nostalgist?
Well, I'm a very nostalgic person.
Okay.
I do think many things were better in the past. Not slavery, say, or
Bold, very bold, Sicha.
I really want to take a firm stand here. Yeah,
Get us on the front page. Come on.
Exactly. I'm against women not having the right to vote.
But pro more people going to the opera.
But I'm pro people wearing gloves. Yeah.
Then you would hate me in winter.
I despise you in all seasons. But our point was sort of like, it's become this mythical thing that's been influenced by, the post-Jane Jacobs world of the New York, of the High Line, of our sort of excellent and sort of not excellent landmarking and preservation work, where Penn Station became this, like, bugaboo, became this like thing everyone had, wedged in their neck of like the destruction of the old romantic, gorgeous New York.
Right.
it was the whole Penn Station was an
It's an
edifice
urban shibboleth or something. Like it was,
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't really understand the city unless you feel a sort of pang of feeling about what is no longer exists inside it.
Well, that's right, and at some level, it's ludicrous, and at some level, for me, and we didn't talk about this very much, but it's a huge issue about our current deep abiding lust for privatization. Penn Station was erected by a private company, and it was torn down by a private company when that company didn't make any money anymore. And what we're doing is we're reprivatizing all manner of institutions, which will be destroyed at the whim of their owners. And I think that's very germane to our society when our schools, our prisons, our healthcare systems, and soon our immigration services and all what have you will be run by private companies that will do as they wish.
So do you think that the nostalgia is this sort of cover for an encroaching privatization, that this feeling of a lost Eden allows developers to come in and say, well, here, as they say sometimes in pop music, we're going to take it back, and do something old school with, like, here's a chocolatier in the lobby.
A chocolate fountain? No, I was kidding.
Chocolatier. I'm thinking of the World Trade Center Winter Garden, where there's
right.
Anyway.
No, exactly. We won't delve into that, but because it's morning and it's morning in America. I do think, not to extend it too far, but I do think the grand visions of the grand private enterprises, which in many senses have made New York. It's not like that the impact, the legacy of big business is vital to New York and will remain vital to New York. But we're having nostalgia for that, and also for beauty. It's, to be fair, people do love a beautiful building,
right?
And I can understand that. I don't like an ugly building,
but you just don't want the nostalgia to overtake what exactly?
In some ways, I didn't want the nostalgia to... Well, also, the nostalgia... With my issue is the nostalgia is being harnessed by developers and by
you want nostalgia to be properly owned by people of true feeling, as opposed to people of spreadsheet motivations.
No, that's right. Because the plan to rebuild Penn Station, which is not being rebuilt, by the way, is to make this grand, beautiful new thing. But the real plan is to create to take the Farley Post Office, the Moynihan Station, air rights, and to build several million square feet of office space, which is desperately probably needed because the office space around Penn Station is basically Class G office space. It's harrowing office space. But that's also run by private corporations for their own interest, and so there's no public benefit afoot here. The $1 billion to $1.5 billion that are going to build all this is coming from someone for their own interest, not necessarily for the rail travelers. So that's my Marxist spiel of the morning, and it's also and I'm not against there being good office space, I mean, corporations need to exist in New York City for it to be vital, but,
well, there's also sort of a sense in which there are certain realms where beauty is okay to talk about, or okay to prize, and the least, I think, architecture and city planning is one of those, uncontroversial areas for that to take root versus, more directly aestheticized things in the world of actual visual or performing arts, where that's not cool for government projects or subsidies or to sort of have much of a role to play.
It is now, and also we can't forget that landmarking and preservation does have a special place in New York. I mean, a lot of it came too late, honestly, for a lot of things. And
but this isn't really landmarking so much as it is a recreation of an old landmark to fit some sort of idealized, mass public conception of the old thing.
Yes, a retroactive mental landmarking of the mind. Yeah, exactly.
It's actually fodder for a Don DeLillo short story or something.
Probably. Does he still write those?
Sorry?
Does he still write those?
He has one in the current or the December issue of Harper's.
The what now? The Harpers?
the Harpers.
I'm totally kidding. Yes. You Harpers.
Heart you Harpers.
But when you go to,
it's pretty good.
I was going to say when you good. When you go to other cities in the United States, even those that have some landmarking, you will see that still in other parts of the world that are not New York, anything can be torn down at a moment's notice. There's some side deals that go on. They say if you preserve this part of X, then you can tear down all the rest of it. But there's literally no investment in other major cities in the United States in keeping things. There's active wars and advocates, obviously, but
one of the most shocking things I found actually when I was living in the Middle East was in the east of Syria in the sort of resort town of Palmyra. Mm-hmm. There are all these. It's actually sort of an oasis in the desert of eastern Syria. And there are a few different resorts and, with swimming pools or whatever inside. And then there's actually just Roman ruins that you can just traipse through. They're completely unmarked and, just kick stuff over and here, sit down on this broken thing if you want to and, who cares?
Right. You can take a little bit home with you. It's nice.
Yeah, and people really are chiseling and doing that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Which, is a different relationship to history, too, I think.
Okay, so we're well past the point of anybody caring, I think, what we're saying about this, but...
I'm well past the point of caring. Just kidding.
Oh.
No. Never, Seth.
So, what else were we going to talk about?
We were going to talk about what's wrong with the children today.
Well, there was, vulgarity, right? There's a certain... Do you want to, couch your editorial inside some sort of theory about vulgarity or something?
No.
Okay.
But, however, I will say... one of the things we were talking about that relate to both copy desks and David Foster Wallace was about the new writers, which both you mentioned earlier about their willingness to presuppose you said an interest in their lives, but to me it's inability to step back and to explain the circumstances of their lives. There's
really, I think it's an audience drawing tactic. The sort of notion that to be a brand or something on the internet or on Tumblr or on some sort of blogging platform, the notion that if I don't present enough information about myself, you have to really pay attention in a sort of serial fashion.
Yes,
that's right. In an RSS fashion to get what I'm doing, and so there's a not just a disinclination, but a motivation to not actually be super forthright about where you're coming from.
That's interesting because, yes, there's a sort of diaristic running life casting going on with a lot of young writers, and it does presuppose, as I like to jokingly say, being completely familiar with one's oeuvre. You know what I mean? Like you have to have read their Tumblr from day one to have any idea what they're talking about.
Right.
Which makes sense because they're not. I appreciate the diaristic form very much, but it makes a lot of sense to me because that's what the form is for. It's for self-expression.
Right.
Remember that time someone walked behind me carrying the cat? The cat's getting his morning ride.
Will we see the cat?
No, there will be no cat appearances.
Oh, man.
So the young people are trained.
I think your cat has fans, right?
My cat's a superstar. My cat is,
right. People will be disappointed if they don't see the cat. But.
And, speaking of diaristic running stories, I expect you to know everything about my cat. You know what I mean? Which is a ludicrous assumption in this day and age. But because I have a Tumblr, because I have a Twitter, because I have a professional website, because I have this, that, and the other thing, you're supposed to know the tale of my cat.
Right.
Which, But, and that's a weird thing. But so our point is that when people come to writing now, I find that the young people often don't step back enough, right?
Right. Which is part of the reason why, as entertaining as I find many Tumblrs, I don't maintain one, though I sort of occasionally threaten to.
I wish you... Well, I guess I don't wish you would.
No, you've expressed the desire that I would, I think, in part because you hope that it would be a different sort of thing, but I haven't figured out how to do it yet, or how to have time to do it.
Well, listen, the internet provides us tools now to do pretty much anything we want, which, obviously I'm pro.
Right.
But, and I know older writers, I hear them talking about how people are twittering themselves to death, or as if there was like a finite number of words one could produce, like, or a finite number of ways one could express oneself. And obviously I'm very against that, but I do, the way you become a writer for the young people who want to be writers is you write constantly all the time. And some of that, you'll get good practice from being diaristic, and you'll get good practice even from tweeting, because actually I think character limitation is very good. And you mentioned working with the Times copy desk earlier. My training as a writer came from writing listings at the New York Times, and those were 140 characters or 340 or whatever. And it was a boot camp for me that went through 3 rounds of editing that taught me how to do things. And I kind of feel like Twitter is a good boot camp for expression, although if you read Sarah Palin's Twitter, obviously it's not really refining.
But the thing is that those don't go through 3 rounds of edits, right? Like it was I think it was probably the conjoining of those features that was really instructive for you, both the concision and the sort of like attention paid.
Yeah, but it was also a huge pain in the butt. I mean, to be honest. God bless, it was amazing. But, the point being that, this is why this huge argument broke out online, and Laura Miller pioneered it in Salon about National Novel Writing Month, which takes place in the month of November every year now, where people... I had a writer friend who I love dearly, who's an amazing writer, but she said to me, don't you think that all these people producing these novels in a month is actually devaluing writing? And I was like, no, like, what do you mean? There's no, I mean, I don't, why, how? So, I feel like that's practice. People need to be writing. Look, I mean, the people aren't encouraged to write in America, and I don't know the rest of the world as well, but perhaps, we don't.
Well, I think, in terms of process that people use to write, I think it's fine to be fairly heterodox in the range of methodologies that you would approve, right? Like it's whatever gets people doing it.
Absolutely, because we live in a time where people, I went through public high schools, and public high schools are very good institutions, but they don't, and they don't stress. They do stress some writing, but in the end, really what I should be going on in public high schools is constant writing, because it leads to the ability to self-express, to read, to understand, to make sense of things. And, and people have, in this modern age, have taken on that enterprise as self-education for themselves. And that's what a Tumblr is. That's what, your blog is.
Right. So are we going to talk about that hipster on-off thing? In the context of this? You sent it to me last night.
Well, we should talk about the Kanye 10.0, shouldn't we?
Right, okay.
So, for those who don't follow the ins and outs of blogs and the popular music, an artist named Kanye West produced a new album, his fifth, Seth?
Fifth studio, yeah.
Fifth studio album. Thank you for defining that.
There's like a weird instrumental version of Late Registration knocking around. It's mostly, I think, is it John Bryan orchestrations or something? But yeah, this is
you're such a completist. Which then promptly received which has been released slowly in singles since about February of this year, and now is being released in full. And
today, I believe.
Today, Mazel Tov, and received a much vaunted 10.0 perfect rating from the website Pitchfork, which is an independent music.
And is it de rigueur at this point to say that it's taste making?
I'm not sure it actually is taste making, but we can
argue about it later. Right. It's either like on one side of the mirror or the other, taste making or exceedingly good at taste following, like one half beat ahead of the beat.
I'm not really in and of that world, so I would hesitate to say anything because I'm a music consumer, not a. Anyway, so this 10.0, when they give out a 10.0, which they've done a handful of times,
not super common,
rocks the world, right?
Well, yeah, and it's sort of become like this generation or whatever's Rolling Stone 5-star assignation.
That's right.
Or the Phillips Rosetta for classical music snobs. And the funny thing here is that Rolling Stone also jumped out ahead of Pitchfork, actually, and gave My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy 5 stars, I think a couple issues ago, or the last issue, or it was online, more than a week ago, I think. So this is an instance in which Rolling Stone, which, to lots of younger listeners is, obviously less a force than it was a couple of generations ago in terms of pop music, critical opinion, consecration. Pitchfork has joined Rolling Stone maybe the first time ever in assigning a perfect rating to an album, which speaks to something, either to some sort of mass public rush to acclaim something, or the fact that it really is the best record in history or something, but it's interesting and it's causing much internet opacity.
It has to reflect a general deep enthusiasm. I mean, I really feel like surely this means that people deeply value it.
Right. Well, I mean, and there's no question that, among pop artists, he's the most, this sort of like Venn diagram of fame at the moment, which is to be good at what you do and also to be good outside of what you do, or to be talkable or clickable or rebloggable outside of your main pursuit. If you can be both excellent in your chosen aesthetic and then also mad tabloidable, then you're sort of, guaranteed to be one of the, Barbara Walters' most interesting people, on all the various iterations of that online and in more traditional forms of media, which is what Kanye essentially is at the moment, between, this sort of Today Show fracas over his trying to apologize to Bush, but then getting mad at Matt Lauer, / having his, cover be one of the covers of his new record, which has 5 different versions of its cover being, sort of mildly sexualized and banned at Walmart, to the actual fact that some of the songs on that record really, really are fantastic.
Can I say one thing about that?
Yeah.
Matt Lauer sucks. That guy's the worst. I mean, honestly, Matt Lauer sucks. And I don't even mean just Kanye. I just mean like, dude, no, Matt Lauer.
Here's the disclaimer where I say I used to work for MSNBC / NBC News, so...
Whatever. Whatever, Becky. Hey, wait. So I've listened to the Kanye West album, and I want to ask you: is it good?
Yeah, I think it's good. I don't think it's 10.0 / 5 stars, but I think especially the first half is really strong. I think that you can really tell where Def Jam's reported $3 million went. I think on a couple of tracks, one of which is All of the Lights, which has actual. You can tell it's not programmed. It's like there's French horns and trumpets and stuff, and Elton John playing piano, and this kind of great electro beat that's all sort of mixed really well together, and it's also a song in which Kanye's lyrics are about something, or the persona that Kanye is adopting in that song is not his own, which I think is something he should do sort of more often, rather than try to narrativize his own really well familiar mythology to anybody who's following pop culture at all. I think, when he steps outside of himself, he can be interesting in a way that I find him to be not interesting when he's just sort of turning over this thing that we've had a lot of drama about in various public spheres, about whether he's too self-involved, or, whether he actually is a douchebag or not, or whether we should be celebrating that or not, which is the subject of the song Runaway, which I find, on the second half of the record, which I find to be the more boring half, is, rather too much suffused with that kind of material. But yeah, I think it's, the parts of the record that are good are really great. And I don't know, what did you think? You tell us whether it's good or not.
I don't know. I like a lot of it. I find some of it very difficult to listen to, which I appreciate. And
which parts are difficult for you to listen to?
Well, it's like the second half of Runaway, right?
Right.
Which is like what I really love about him is texture, and I love the acoustic texture of a lot of it, that he's playing with, really nasty distorted electronic stuff, and also providing like a very acoustic, real world actual texture. But also it's like the second half of that song. I'm kind of like, this is hard to listen to Kanye, which is a really valuable thing in pop music in the age of Kesha, which is despicable, basically. Like, for those who are not informed, she is a young pop star who makes Get Crunk, Blackout, Wear Ripped Stockings party music, which I have a proto-feminist interest in. To be fair, she's just a little tardy to that party. But I find
you're about to write your own Kesha song, "Tardy to the Party." Yeah,
look,
you should
that
do it.
stuff is catchy. That stuff is catchy. I'm sorry. Here's the other thing about pop music I'll say, which is like, even schmoes like me have a copy of Logic, like the music composition and recording software.
Right.
And I kind of feel like anyone can make that happen. Like, I can make a Britney Spears track happen in my house in like 4 hours.
I don't know. I've heard some of your remixes.
Hey, I'm good. I'm not that good, but the thing is, listen. If you sat down and said like, "Wow, you can't see this. My hair is out of control right now. I don't know what's going on."
I can't wait.
Whoa, I'm homeless. A pop song. Look, the lyrics of these pop songs are. I mean, okay, I know people have been saying this since the 1940s, but the lyrics of these pop songs are so inane, so desperately inane. The Black Eyed Peas are so desperately poisonous to like linguistic culture.
But that goes back and forth. That hasn't always been the case. There have been like pockets, and I think it's usually when America is prosperous where we're willing to brook a sort of complexity in pop music, and then in times of recession, I think people sort of drill down for stuff that's really clean and discernible.
That's interesting. Is that true?
I don't know. I mean, but I think the explosion of the middle, and the explosion, but the actual creation of a middle class in the mid part of the century is where you also have a lot of abstraction finding its way into pop music, and the Beatles listening to Stockhausen and putting those sort of massed orchestras without any discernible pitch into a day in the life, And I think that, but then there's a point where people just want clarity, and that prizes a certain, and I think there's also a crisis also in music criticism of people wanting to be, and this speaks directly to the Pitchfork, Rolling Stone, Kanye thing, of being really on it when something is blowing up or becoming, very, very talked about. And this notion that you sort of have to, not only do you have to weigh in, but you sort of have to make waves with your interpretation of something, because that's how you're going to get an audience, which in the long tail, splintering economy, destruction of all the old school titans of media is a basic imperative, right?
We also sort of go on.
Oh, it just works really well with. I mean, I think a lot of pop music this year that's been successful or sort of critically adored has made a virtue out of being really, for example, not creative with profanity. And here's I guess this is the part where we tell people that we're going to maybe use some swear words. But
I'm not.
CeeLo had a really well-received song a couple months ago, the title of which is just "Fuck You," and it's a first-person Jeremiah ad from one guy who's been jilted by a girl who's hooked up with somebody else, and the whole song is just basically the kiss-off in that explicit form. And The Dream, who's a celebrated producer, had a record come out this year where in the course of one verse he's trying to think of what rhymes with asshole to use on a person to whom he's not feeling lots of affection, and he just, instead of actually trying to finish the couplet by rhyming something with asshole, he just says, "Oh yeah, asshole," and that was something that delighted people for its complete throwing up of the hands of trying to actually be poetic about that type of calumny.
Right.
And I think the same thing you see in Kanye, where it's just like, he's tired of trying to think about whether or not he should, how many flagellations he should execute in public over various of his escapades over the last couple of years in various live TV settings, for example, where he just sort of says, like, let's raise a toast to the douchebags, which is actually the most poetic form of trying to talk about profanity.
Totally.
But it's still pretty, raw and not complex. And I think that is really, the internet's really happy about that, or it's easy to talk about, and people really love that.
The internet's very happy about that, and there's, in a way, we're all kids, especially the people who are currently kids, and
right.
So we, this was what punk did in a way too, is we got to say, rude things, and it's cute to be able to say rude things.
Right.
But it's sort of at a next level now. It's a lot larger. And there's like a joy, there's a joy in being a potty mouth.
Sure. Right, like back
level.
to the Sex Pistols on TV or something, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, sure. And it's sort of cute. I mean, it's sort of cute that, I mean, honestly, I always find it shocking that there's still radio edits. Like, for some reason, my copy of Kanye that I had, like, it all says ish instead of shit. You know what I mean? And I'm like, really? We're still pretending we live in a prudish culture where we can't say that, shit on the radio? When, if you go to Ireland, the 8 p.m. TV hour is, has every word imaginable.
Huh.
You're like, that end communication. No, but the point being that, like, if you have to do a little future forecasting, it's like kids who are growing up today with pop songs that are titled "Fuck You" is going to be a world in which that's going to enter further into popular culture. I mean, you know what I mean?
Right, and I don't think that we're like, censorious people coming in to say like, oh, these are bad words or something. I think it's that there's no shock of anything to it. Like the thing that it's advertising is not the same sort of thrill of saying bad words that Johnny Rotten may have had 25 years ago or however long ago it was.
45.
It's more like the attraction is the blasé quality of being able to say it, of just tossing it off.
That makes sense to me.
And,
yeah.
And that's a different thing. That's a reading down of enjoyment in a certain type of naughty behavior, which I think tracks in some way with the kind of dulling of enthusiasm or the kind of ennui that people also feel online, where people are always saying, people are always lusting for a new type of sincerity online, or they're worried about the problem of conveying tone on the internet. There's always this thing of like saying, let's have the new sincerity, or let's have this or that. And by the end of the week, when that meme has sort of played itself out, everybody's saying, well, that's over. That thing that we were going to do, where we were going to be nicer on the internet, is done. And then everybody sort of makes fun of the fact that anybody thought it could ever actually happen. And
well, I mean, here's the problem with the internet, and Emily Gould has talked about this extensively too, and I'm a subscriber to the theory, which is that the problem with the internet is that it's composed of people who are learning the same lesson over and over again sequentially.
Right.
Which I think is true, which is that everyone has to learn for the first time what it's like to hurt someone's feelings inadvertently, and everyone has to learn for the first time what it's like to expose themselves in ways they don't want to be exposed. And so everyone learns these lessons about the consequences of being a jerk, either accidentally or intentionally, or about self-revelation, one at a time. And there's a lot of people on the internet, and there's more every day. And so we live in this time where the same mistakes are made over and over and over again relentlessly, and and it's a little boring, but it's a necessary group education. You know what I mean? It's important.
But then without the education, sort of, because the cycling of, the peer group or the cohort turnover rate or the addition of new voices into it means that none of the lessons are sort of processed.
Well, they are processed a little bit. Like when you look at self-sustaining communities, whether commenter communities on specific websites, if you look at a website called Metafilter, for example, which is something like 12 or so years old now at this point, 13 maybe, maybe a little older. It's a self-policing community, pretty much. It has some moderators, but it's all about self-policing. And it's people, and you watch people learning this about tone on the internet, about how to speak to other people like human beings, about how to, how to treat people and how to be treated in a sort of kindergarten sense, over and over again. But you also can see the community address those people and say, like, look, yes, we've all been through this. I've done this too, and now you're here to learn this experience as well.
Right.
So, I don't think Twitter's particularly a good thing for this process, because it's people learning this over and over again at a very high volume and high rate. If you look at Kanye West's Twitter, you're like, dude, you're not 16. You're acting like a troubled teen with no boundaries and you're being a ridiculous pouty brat, basically, and screaming at the world constantly. And is he going to learn a lesson? And I know I sound like an old crazy man, but is he going to learn a lesson about like how to treat himself appropriately on the internet? Listen, but like you kids, but seriously, is he going to learn a lesson about how to behave on the internet and how to treat himself properly?
But
Probably not.
What's the motivation to do that though? Because this is working out famously for him.
It's working out famously for him, except he doesn't feel good when he goes to bed. He regrets things. And these people who are constantly
Do you think that, I mean, I don't know.
Twitter,
I guess I'm just not convinced that
he regrets.
maybe it's just uber cynical, but I don't know that. I think he must be
He's
conscious
also
to some extent
rewarded.
of the sort of public fiction of his myth. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
Like,
sure.
the extent to which he's upset about something in public may be, magnified from the true internal Kanye. I don't know the fact that just because we now get our news about Kanye West from Kanye West's Twitter feed versus from the journalist that he refuses to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that that's a guarantee of any sort of greater or more true insight into the man inside, right?
But narcissists are always self-mythologizing, and we're always going to have celebrity narcissists who are deeply important to themselves, who are always trapped in their own myth-making, and, he's not going to change probably necessarily, although he may look back on some of this and laugh and be like, why was I so worked up? But, but the thing is,
did I tell you the time I ran into Kanye in a movie theater?
Go on.
No, yeah. It was, I think, I did a really brief Q&A with him shortly after that for Newsweek when his book came out, his self-help book that I think
yes.
nobody really paid attention to, but...
why would they? I mean, I don't want him to help. Yeah, I need to go on.
And but right before, we had been negotiating it for just weeks with the third-party publicist who was working the book because we couldn't get anywhere with his actual circle, And I was in a movie... I can't even remember what it was, but he was buying popcorn in the line behind me, and I recognized him. And at first, I was just shocked, and I introduced myself, and there was some sort of manager or person in his circle was standing with him, and we talked a bit, and just like a steady stream of kids came up to him asking for autographs and stuff with their moms or whatever in the concession stand, and I sort of stopped pimping, my desire that we were going to do some sort of Q&A and, saying, oh, you might have heard about this or whatever, and then just let this flow of adolescent to adult people kind of come up to him and shake his hand and tell him that they thought he was the best. And it was interesting because he seemed to deal with them sincerely.
Oh, sure. That's the other thing about, yeah, exactly. I think he's a great artist and a smart person, and I don't think he's not interested in other people. It's just the tools we have now to tell our own stories are too attractive.
Uh-huh.
And in the end, I'm in favor. Like I say, in the end, I'd rather have this than anything else. But
because you don't like meeting people.
I like meeting people. I'm extremely social.
Okay.
I'm a socialist. I socialize, as Justin Bond says. Tell it.
That's weird, but okay. You'd love to meet more people in the current much hated Penn Station.
I would love to. Meeting people is easy. Meeting people is very easy. It's knowing which ones you want to continue
Tom York's
to speak
totally
to, which
wrong
is very hard.
About this and many
Tom York's been. Remember Tom York? Remember people used to talk about Radiohead?
I do.
Interesting?
It'll happen again.
It'll happen again. Does that conclude our discussion?
I think, in not necessarily the most explosive of ways.
I just wanted to say, fuck you, Seth Colter Wallace.
Well, I'm raising a toast to your douchebaggery, Choire Sicha.
You know what? I have to say, I love that song. But
not the second half?
Well, the second half I love because it's complicated, but it's not exactly ooh, I'm in the club,
Right. And then after that, I feel like there's nothing really for me on the record. I don't know why.
The record does tend to get a little, how you say, drifty, yes.
But the Good Friday track from a couple weeks ago that Q-Tip produced is worth finding online. That's it, I guess.
Wow, Seth, this was really invigorating.
So good, and I'll send you another piece soon, I guess.
Oh yeah, keep on writing, Slugger. Listen, you need to.
I think I owe a guy in the comments a breakdown of the opera that I went to see on Saturday. I'm gonna try to do that.
Oh, good. You should probably be doing a really good job at work right now because.
Oh right, that thing too. Yes, and that's why we did this early so that I can turn on my full attention.
Tina Brown should know that you're a hero and a backbone of the organization.
Whether or not that's true, she should know it.
Well, it's an age of perception, Seth.
I'm going to start a Tumblr about it.
Not a bad idea, honestly.
Okay. From the backbone of Newsweek. Thanks for talking to me, Corey.
Good day, sir.
Bye.